Okay, today's aim is how do we understand logical reasoning? There are many components of logical reasoning, but the first one we really need to understand is the conditional statement. And a conditional statement is made up of a premise or a hypothesis, these terms are used interchangeably, and a conclusion. And the statement is formed as follows. If premise, then conclusion. So you should all be taking this down in your notes. If you need to, put your player on pause and then resume once you're ready to continue. Okay, let's take an example. If today is Monday, then I eat PB&J for lunch. If, then. If premise, then conclusion. So my premise is today is Monday, and my conclusion is I eat PB&J for lunch. One thing to notice is that the premise omits the word if, and the conclusion omits the word then. So your premise never has the word if in it. The conclusion never has the word then in it. Let's take another example. If two lines are parallel, then the lines never converge. So your premise is going to be two lines are parallel, and your conclusion is the lines never converge. You should be writing these examples down. They belong in your notes. If you need to, put your player on pause and then resume when you're done. Let's take a third example. If the quadrilateral is a square, then the figure has four right angles. The premise is the quadrilateral is a square. The conclusion, the figure has four right angles. Let's take another example. Again, if you need to, put your player on pause and then hit play when you're done. If you live in Chicago, then you live in Illinois. So the premise to our conditional is you live in Chicago. The conclusion to our conditional is you live in Illinois. So there are symbols that we use in math to represent premise and conclusion, and they are P arrow Q. So what does P arrow Q mean? Remember, it's a symbol, which means it has to be universal. So P means premise, and Q means conclusion. Not the word conclusion starts with a Q. We know it does not. Why they're using P and Q, I'm not exactly sure. But this is the convention. How do we read this? What does this actually mean? It means if P, then Q. If premise, then Q, then the conclusion. So let's take this down as well. You need to know the symbols. Okay, let's continue. So what we want you to do is we want you to state the premise and conclusion of each statement. We're giving you an if-then statement. We're giving you two of them. We want you to identify the premise and conclusion in each of them. Put your player on pause, write them down, and then when you're ready to check your answer, hit play. Okay, if the animal is a robin, then the animal is a bird. So first off, the premise is the animal is a robin. The conclusion is going to be the animal is a bird. The second one, the premise is the angle measures 130 degrees. The conclusion is the angle is obtuse. So if premise, then conclusion. Good. What kind of questions could they ask us to do? Well, they may want us to write a conditional statement from a given statement. In other words, I want to write a conditional from a statement. So the first thing I have to do is identify the hypothesis and conclusion, and then I have to write the conditional using the hypothesis and conclusion. So let's take a look. Vertical angles share a common vertex. Notice how there is no if-then in this statement, but I should be able to identify the hypothesis and conclusion from this statement. So vertical angles share a common vertex. We know that that is true. So if you have vertical angles, and we can actually draw them. So let's see, we have two angles, angle 1 and angle 2, and these are vertical angles, and they do share a common vertex, which is right over there. Okay, so I want to be able to identify the hypothesis and conclusion. So the hypothesis is going to be the angles are vertical angles. And what is the conclusion? Well, the angles share a common vertex. So here I've been given a statement, vertical angles share a common vertex, and I'm creating a conditional statement from that statement. So the conditional is if two angles are vertical angles, then they share a common vertex. So this is our conditional. If two angles are vertical angles, that's the hypothesis, then they, conclusion is, share a common vertex. So why don't you try this one? So identify the hypothesis and conclusion, and then write a conditional using the hypothesis and conclusion. So here's your statement. Dolphins are mammals. Put your player on pause. Try to, number one, identify the hypothesis and conclusion, and number two, write the conditional statement using the hypothesis and conclusion. Put your player on pause, and when you're done, hit play to resume. Okay, so first off, let's identify the hypothesis and conclusion. So the hypothesis is the animal is a dolphin, or it is a dolphin. It's perfectly fine. You don't have to, your hypothesis and conclusion do not have to be identical to what we have. So again, you can see I use hypothesis and premise interchangeably. It's perfectly fine. They are exactly the same thing. So the premise or the hypothesis is the animal is a dolphin. The conclusion is it is a mammal. How do we put this together to write a conditional? Very simply. If the animal is a dolphin, it is a mammal. And that concludes premises and conclusions and writing conditional statements. And check Jupyter Grades and you will see what your homework is.